Right. So today what we're doing is we're going to go over this chapter 10, and I call it imperfect competition just because it's a nice, easy way to get the abbreviations down, or not abbreviations, but it's a nice way to write it and make it look nice, or nice way to summarize both monopolistic competition and the oligopoly. So at this point, we talked about over the past couple weeks, and a little recap. We've been talking about our a market structure. So we start out with the competitive market. We said this is a market where we have many firms producing the exact same good. Then we moved into the monopoly, where we have one firm producing all of the goods for the entire market, and that was the week before spring break. We looked at the monopoly, looked at why do we have them, how do they come about, and so on. And today, what we get into is kind of that middle ground. So we have these two extremes, but then we have, not everything is always a ton of firms or one firm. We can have an industry with a couple of firms, and we can have an industry, we can have industries in lots of shapes, lots of sizes, lots of different structures, and so on. And that's what these two are going to look at: monopolistic competition and oligopoly. So with the monopolistic competition, we're going to see they're going to act a lot like a monopoly. And again, we'll dive through them relatively quick. The oligopoly is going to be what I'm going to dive into more. This is one of my personal favorite parts of microeconomics, just because it's fun. There's a lot of applications in it. Today we'll probably look at more of the theory. Then on Wednesday, dive more into some examples and some stuff like that. So that's what we have to look forward to this week. It's a really fun chapter and really interesting. So what we're getting into with this, again, we have this phrase imperfect competition or imperfectly competitive. And this just means that, again, we don't necessarily have competitive markets. We're not dealing with monopolies. We're just dealing with that middle ground and just seeing what's going on right here in this middle ground in this imperfectly competitive markets. And with these, again, we have two types. Our monopolistic competition, which again is when we have a lot of firms, but they're selling. The note that we're going to make with them is they have similar but differentiated products. And basically, what differentiated means is that we can tell them apart. So in the perfectly competitive market example, one of the examples that I mentioned was corn. I said you're not really going to notice much of a difference between Boone corn and Grimes corn or anything like that. And if you think about gas, for the most part, as long as your gas station is operating like they should, you're not really going to notice much of a difference between Shell gas or Casey's gas, right? It's going to be relatively the same. Your car is not going to get like 50 miles a gallon with Casey's, but 10 miles a gallon with come and go gas, right? For the most part, they're the same. But we have these monopolistic competitive goods that we can actually tell them apart. And for this, we might think about something like we've kind of mentioned these differentiable goods before. We talked about things like your fast food restaurants, right? There's a difference between Culver's and McDonald's. There's a difference between a steak from $100 steakhouse and a steak from a $5 steak special, right? There's a difference, and we're probably more likely able to tell them apart, even though they're very similar products. And the last group that we have is called an oligopoly, and this is kind of similar to a monopoly, but not really. So we're going to see with this is that we're going to have a few firms that are very large that have pretty much all or most of the sales in an industry. So a couple things we may see with the oligopoly. One of the big ones that we'll look at will be the airlines. Right, for the most part, if I want to go from Des Moines to Boise, Idaho, right, more than likely I'm going to fly on either American, Delta, or United. Or another way to think about that, if I want to go from anywhere USA or to anywhere in the world, more than likely I'm going to start on one of three of the major carriers. So we have our airlines. We also have our cell phone providers. Um, so things like Verizon, AT&T, and depending on where we live, this becomes more or less of an oligopoly. I know out in Boone, normally you probably want to have either Verizon or US Cellular. I know that at our house, because when we moved out here, we had Sprint or Boost Mobile, which is Sprint, and it didn't work here. So it for us, even though yes, technically we can give our money to Sprint and we can be a customer, it doesn't work. It's not a viable option for us. So when you think about our cell phone providers, for the most part, again, you're probably going to have either AT&T, Verizon, um, T-Mobile, or Sprint. Probably one of those four is probably you're going to have. Or if you don't have one of those four, you'll have a variant of one of them. So I mentioned Boost Mobile. Boost Mobile runs on the Sprint network. So you kind of have that choice of four firms. So that's the kind of the two big things we're looking at. Monopoly competition, oligopoly. So the big thing we talked about was having a differentiated product. That is, how can we, oops, excuse me, really quick. All right. So when we think about this differentiated product, what we're seeing is we as consumers may perceive the goods in different ways. And we have kind of four main ways that this can happen. And we'll kind of dive through them really quick. So this first one, physical aspects. And what this kind of looks at is, are the goods physically different? So if we think about something like uh, a McDonald's Big Mac versus a Burger King Whopper, right? A Big Mac has the two patties, it has the bun in the middle, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickle, onion, all this SBC bun. Whereas a Whopper is more of just right, it's beef, lettuce, tomato, mayo, onion, stuff like that, and so on. Right, so we can physically tell that they're different, and even if you take it a step further, even if we took a chicken tender from Culver's versus a chicken tender from McDonald's, maybe their breading is different, uh, maybe their chicken's different. I don't know, but these things, they actually are different. Again, they're similar. They may look similar. They may have a lot of similar traits to them, but they are physically different products. So that's these physical aspects. This is what you think it is. Really nothing too crazy with the first one. The second one, the location from which we sell. So what we may think about for this one is, how far do I have to go to get it? Oops. Uh, so how far do I have to travel? So for this one, what we might think about is it's exactly that. So this can come from two fronts. One, if I'm thinking about what do I want for lunch today, and assuming I was going out for lunch today, I might think about something like the Dutch oven. Uh, so the Dutch oven has locations in both Boone and Ames. So with the Dutch oven, although the two different restaurants, they're owned by the same people, they have the same menu, they have probably the same prices, the same everything, and so on, but they come from two different places. One is downtown Boone, the other is over in Ames. Same thing with something like McDonald's, or any type of almost any type of store, a Walmart, McDonald's, whatever it is. um, Even if, right, if I go to somewhere like McDonald's or Burger King, I expect consistency. I expect to get the same thing whether I'm in Boone, Ames, Nashville, Tennessee, Los Angeles, whatever the case may be. But again, the reason that I'm probably going to go to the Boone store over the Cheyenne, Wyoming store today is because Boone is a lot closer. It's a lot more convenient. Even if I'm thinking about somewhere like Walmart or Fairway, uh, right? And fairways are nice because they're kind of similar across the whole state. Uh, right. The reason that if I'm going to go to the store today, it's probably going to be the one in Boone, is because it's the most convenient. And even though the stores may have the same exact layout, the same exact everything else, one is more convenient than the other. So its location differentiates it for me as a consumer. This third one is intangible aspects. So with our intangible aspects, um, there are a couple things we may think of. One of them could be potentially the values of a company, or something like a small versus large business. Every so often, a company sits and they get involved in stuff, and a part of the population may say, "Oh, I don't want to shop here anymore. I don't want to go to this restaurant." And sometimes we get into uh, maybe not us in particular, but people start a boycott over a business because people don't like what the business supported. So if I disagree with the values of a company, or on the other side, if I know that a certain company shares my values, I may go ahead and be more willing and more apt to shop there. And then on the other side of this intangible, small versus large business, um, throughout the last couple of weeks, if you're on any community pages, you've probably seen this. A lot of people are, and people in general will say this, a phrase we hear a lot is shop local, right? So when we say shop local, we're saying, hey, you should go out and support local businesses before they're saying that you should support local businesses before the national chains if you can. And again, I'm not coming in making a statement where you should or shouldn't shop. It's up to you. But some people will. If I have a local option, I will take that local option before I go to so some people would rather go to Fairway than Walmart just because Fairway is more local. But on the other side, some people may also say, well, I want to go to the big business because I know they're going to have what I need. So if had never been to Boone, if I had never been to Iowa before, I may not know if Fairway has what I need, right? So on that front, I may say, well, yeah, that's great, but I just want to go to the big store because it gets me in, gets me out, and I know they'll have everything that I'm looking for. So again, small versus large business, they're selling the exact same products, but they're different in the sense that right, one is more local, the other is a larger store. And this is something where maybe you can't even, and in many instances you can't even tell whether or not a business actually is small or large. And by that, I'm referring to, and this is why a part of the reason why this would be intangible. If you think about McDonald's, so you think about McDonald's as this large corporation, but if you look into uh, your actual local McDonald's, you'll see that most of your McDonald's are not owned by McDonald's. They're owned by somebody local. So a lot of the ones across Iowa are owned by the O'Brien family. I know Boone, Ames, Nevada, all of them are owned by O'Brien family. And sometimes they'll have a little sticker that says this is owner is this person or this group. So even if something appears to be a large business, it may actually be a local person running it, and so on. So again, that's why it's intangible. It's not always obvious to see whether it's necessarily big or small business. Then this last one is perceptions. So perceptions is uh, does a firm have a good reputation? And so what we may think about with this, if I'm going to, so two fronts. One, does a firm have a good reputation? Two, um, do I expect a good product? And I'll explain that in just a moment. So you think about firms, and if I happen to mention a place that you work at or a place that you have previously worked at, it's not intentional. There are some places that have different reputations, and so on. So I'm not picking on anyone in particular. It just might come up. So if we think about if we think about something like McDonald's, right? With McDonald's, and I heard a comedian I think mention it, but if you think about going to McDonald's, you kind of think, well, more than likely, it's not going to be terrible, right? But it's also not going to be like the greatest thing you've ever had, right? You're kind of getting it's all right. And with that, it's all right kind of mentality, hey, it's going to be all right. It's not going to be like the greatest thing you ever had, but more than likely, it's not going to be this terrible place. And one of the things you may like about McDonald's is consistency, right? That is uh, wherever I go, everything is the same ingredients, the same proportions, and so on. So if a certain restaurant has a reputation for being dirty or being uh, not very good, um, right? So if people have a reputation to go in, they get cold food every time they go, and so on. Even if you come across one that is actually uh, probably a good one, and with our fast food restaurants, we have this. We have good and bad McDonald's, we have good and bad Burger Kings, Hardee's, all that fun stuff. They're there. But if a firm has a uh, lesser reputation, you might say, I don't really want to eat there because you had a bad experience in Tennessee, so now you don't want to eat at the one in Iowa, right? And something that could come up. And this last one, do I expect a good product? Uh, for this, what I'm going to think about is something, I don't know. So think about something like Iowa seafood and Florida beef. So if I come to Iowa and I decide I want crab tonight, I pretty much know that I'm not going to get crab that was caught this morning, right? Whereas, and one of the cool things we had in Myrtle Beach, just north, there was little town just north of Myrtle Beach called Calabash. If you're ever down there, go check it out. They have really good seafood. But one of the perks of this town was they bought the stuff, meaning all the food was pretty much caught locally, right there, right off the coast of the town. So if I come to Iowa, I know I'm not going to get uh, fresh lobster, fresh crab that was caught this morning, right? I may be fresh, it may be a couple days, but it's not going to be super fresh, just out of the ocean lobster crab, excuse me, or anything like that. But on the other side of this, if I'm in Florida or somewhere that's more coastal, their beef is not quite like it is here, right? And again, it could be that freshness factor. I don't know what it is because relatively we preserve stuff, but for whatever reason, if you get basically any kind of beef in Iowa, it normally turns out better than it does in South Carolina, Florida, or a coastal place. So with our perceptions, what I might say is, uh, well, I'm in this area, so I need to eat this product. So when you're in Maine, you have a lobster roll. If you're in the Midwest, you want to have pork or beef or some chicken, something like that. If you're in the South or if you're by the coast, maybe you want to get crab, right? So we have those kind of regional things where, well, I'm in this area, I want to get this product. If you're in Iowa, you get corn. If you're in Florida, you get oranges, right? So stuff like that um, is stuff where we're saying, do we expect a good product? We have this perception. Uh, Again, I have this idea that Iowa beef is going to be better than Florida beef, which it is. And same thing, uh, if someone was trying to sell me Iowa oranges, I would personally rather have a Florida orange than an Iowa orange, just because um, the ones from Florida has a better um, Florida has a better reputation. I have a better perception of how an orange is going to come out of Florida than Iowa. So again, just a few ways that our products can be differentiated, uh, and some things that cause that. So the next little bit we look at is, and we'll kind of get back to these curves in a second as we get into the monopolistic competitive market. But the next question that we kind of have, we want to look at is how does a monopolistically competitive firm actually act? And what we're going to see is they're going to act pretty much um, the same way that a monopolist does. That is, they're going to have a curve, excuse me, they're going to have a curve that looks something like they'll see a demand curve. Underneath that demand curve, they'll have marginal revenue, and so on. And then they'll have a marginal cost that maybe looks something like that. So basically, the same thing as a monopolist, but one of the things that we're going to see is with them is their curve is going to be more. They're going to have a more elastic demand curve. And if we remember from chapter 5, we were talking about elasticity. And one of the things that we talked about was how specific is a good. So if I have an example, we did things like clothes and jeans, right? Clothes are more inelastic than jeans because I have to wear clothes. Right? I have to have clothes that, at least somewhat fit, at least, normally if you're working a professional job or something like that, you want to show up uh, looking at least halfway decent. Um, so clothes, relatively inelastic. I have to have clothes, but I don't necessarily have to go out and buy jeans, right? If jeans are too expensive, I can go get khakis, I can get shorts, I can get whatever it is I want to get. Same thing here when we think about this monopolistic competitive market. If I think about, say, um, if I think about a certain brand's product, so if I think about a Culver's Butterburger versus, say, just a burger in general, the excuse me, the product that is more specific is going to be more elastic, whereas the product that's less specific will be more inelastic. So if we had a monopoly, the monopolist really sees just the entire market because there's nobody else to compete against them. But if I think about Culver's, right, the market that they see is the market for a Culver's Butterburger. And they are different than McDonald's or Burger King or Colorado Grill or whatever your local restaurant may be, right? They're different, but again, they're similar to everybody else. So this is the monopolistic competitor. So what this will look like again, and I'm going to color code these a little bit just for the sake of why not. So we had price and quantity. So our monopolist looks something like that. They have the full demand curve. And we'll end up see happening if we look at this from a way out something, we'll see that our uh, other firm will kind of probably start lower somewhere. And then as the price goes down, right, they'll have a higher quantity. And again, this is a flatter curve. It's more inelastic. So we say that our gold curve in this case, oops, I want that to be black. Our gold curve is more elastic than our green curve. And the idea of this again is, so suppose that we are in, I don't know, suppose we're in Texas, right? I don't think they have Culver's in Texas, so it works out fairly nice for me. So if we're in Texas, right, if I may be in a situation where I want a burger, but I don't necessarily have to have a Culver's burger, right? That is, if Culver's is too far away, as they may be in Texas, considering it'd be a drive to, I don't know how far, but it'd probably be a decent drive since Culver's is centered around Wisconsin. Um, if I'm in Texas, Culver's is too far to drive, so I'm not going to be willing to make that drive, even if I wanted the Culver's burger. And similarly, even around home, if Culver's were to raise their price to some astronomical price, I might say, you know what, I don't need them. I'd rather just have, excuse me. So if today I said, well, yeah, I'll go to Culver's because they sound good. But if Culver's said we're going to double the price of our food, I may say, you know what, I don't need to go to Culver's. I can go to McDonald's or Chick-fil-A or somewhere else instead. Right. So again, whereas when a competitive market raises their price, I may switch away. However, if a monopolist raises their price, I don't really have that choice as much. Um, and if you think about your electric company, again, if your electric company decides to raise their prices, uh, you know, you can move, but you can't just say, well, I'm going to go with another electric company. Like I can go through and say, well, I don't want to go to Culver's today. I'm going to go to McDonald's. Right. So uh, for that reason, again, our monopolistically competitive market will be more elastic, but everything else will be pretty much the same. Set marginal revenue to the marginal cost, find the highest price you can charge, and that's how we maximize our profits. So again, they work a lot like a monopolist, just a little more elastic. And let me check my chat really quick, just to make sure I'm good. Cool. So we get into next is our oligopoly. And with our oligopoly, and again, this is what I think is the fun part of this week. This is really one of my favorite parts of micro. Um, but when we look at our oligopoly, we're seeing is that we have a, oops, what did I just do? My bad. So when we look at our oligopoly, we're seeing as we have a small number of companies or firms, uh, and yeah, we have a small number of firms that are producing all or most of the sales in an industry. Um, and what we see with the monopolists or with an oligopolist, and what makes them interesting is that when they make a decision, they have to consider what the other firm does. Uh, so if we think about something like if we're playing a game of chess, uh, I can't necessarily just say, well, this is my strategy, I'm going to go with it. Instead, I have to play my strategy, but I also have to keep in mind what you're doing, because if you behave in a way that doesn't go well with what I'm doing, I have to adjust my strategy and so on. So when you think about the oligopolist, again, that's really going to be the decision they have to make. They have to figure out, what am I going to do, but they also have to think about what their competitor or the other firm is going to do as well. So what they're going to see, or we're often going to see with our oligopolists, is one of two choices. They have a choice to either compete or collude. Um, so if they compete, they're going to have low prices. They're going to very much act like a perfect competitor. Um, and as they compete, more and more firms will come in, and they'll keep going at it until uh, they have that zero profit condition that we saw with the competitive market. But, or it'll be closer to that than a monopolist. But since they have such a small number of people or firms, what they can do is they can do this thing that's called colluding. And if they collude, basically what they're doing is they're going to they're going to act together, and they're going to really just work together to keep prices high. So the way they'll do this largely is by reducing output. Excuse me. And again, basically the idea is you and I agree we're going to charge a high price, so we collude to keep the price high. The example we may run into is, suppose we have two gas stations that are the last two gas stations for, say, 300 miles. Uh, both of us know that we're the last station for a long time. So what we might do is say, well, we're going to charge $4, $5 a gallon for gas, and if people don't like it, too bad. They only have us two as a choice. So if we collude, we'll see that we can make ourselves, though we'll actually tend to have both firms be better off. And we have a scenario for that we'll run into down the road. So again, the way that we collude, again, is we hold down our output, so we keep our quantity low. We want to charge higher prices, so we agree to charge a higher price, and we may also divide profits among ourselves. So we might say, hey, we're both going to charge a high price, but if more people come to mind than yours, we're going to split the profits. That way, you're not getting a short end of the straw. So in our example for the last gas station for 300 miles, we might think about, is suppose that one gas station is on the right side of the road, the other is on the left side of the road. More than likely, if they have the same price, people are going to tend, at least in America, people are going to tend to go to the one on the right side of the road because it's easier on, easier off. Whereas the left side of the road, you have to cross oncoming traffic and all that fun stuff. So when they collude, what they might say is, hey, we know that more people are going to go to the one on the right. So, right, the one on the right agrees to split some profits to prevent the firm on the left from lowering enough to a price where people would want to turn left or have to cross traffic to go to the gas station. And when we collude, so in the case these two gas stations, once they have taken part in this collusion, they've formed what's called a cartel. And this is where firms actually have that formal agreement to collude, and they produce monopoly output or near monopoly output and sell at that price. The other thing a cartel can do is not necessarily produce a monopoly, but play a game where instead of having, say, 20 competitors, you have only 5, if a large number of them join a cartel. So when we think about our cartels, a couple words that kind of come to mind, or a couple examples that we may see. And one of them we'll actually dive into a little bit right now because it's really relevant. When we think about our cartels, a couple examples we have. One, we often hear about the drug cartels. Right? So these are folks who, right, they're down in Central South America. Your basic drug line into the States often comes through these cartels. But the more interesting one that I'm going to focus on right now is OPEC. And this is oil, I think it's oil and petroleum exporting countries, something like that. So basically what OPEC is, it's a group of countries a group of oil producing countries that have said, hey, we're going to work together to keep the price of oil manageable. And some countries in this are Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, a lot of your Middle Eastern countries plus Venezuela. And we might have like Malaysia or something like that. Let me look really quick. No, not Malaysia. So you have like Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Algeria, Libya, and a couple other countries in Africa. But with OPEC, what they do is they basically agree. They say, hey, we're going to keep the, excuse me, we're going to watch how much oil we produce and keep it low. And that is not the right thing for them. The actual name for them is the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Oops, excuse me. So we have OPEC, and one of the, I'm not going to say cool, but one of the interesting things going on with them right now is if you've noticed at all, the gas prices right now are very low, right? So gas prices are low. I think last night, I got gas for $1.69 in Boone. So probably somewhere in Des Moines, it's probably $1.49, $1.39 right now. So if we notice that gas prices are low right now, so this is coming from two fronts. The first, obviously, like people aren't driving right now. The only place that we can drive to is carry-out restaurants and the grocery store, at least pretty much, or a hospital. So we can't go to a lot of the places that we normally might go to. There are no hockey games going on. I mean, even today, I didn't even drive to work. I just kind of came into a room where that works well for recording, and we're here, right? And none of you drove to school today, right? So we're all kind of where we are. So gas prices right now are terribly low. So on one front, yes, we have that decrease in demand. But another thing going on is a price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. So whereas normally what would happen? So coronavirus comes in, right? Everybody starts to stay home, yada yada. Normally, what OPEC would do is they would cut oil production, with the idea being that they want to keep oil prices relatively high. They want to keep things stable, and so on. However, with this deal with Saudi Arabia and Russia, and if you just look it up, you can kind of get a little more in depth with it. But basically, what they're doing with this price war is they're saying, "Oh, we're just going to produce more oil," and they are competing against each other. They are very strongly competing with each other. So they're both agreeing to create more oil, or they're not agreeing to. They're both just making more oil, which first we have that decrease in demand, which already uh, I'm going to say hurts, because I'm going to say hurts in the sense from the oil market perspective. Hurts oil prices, makes them really low, even though for us, most people aren't going to complain about $1.59 oil, but whatever. So it lowers this oil, it kind of tanks the oil market just from coronavirus. But since we have that additional price war going on, we have this super high increase in supply. So whereas normally we would want to cut, or we meaning OPEC would cut supply back, uh, they're actually raising supply because they have this price war going on, which makes oil prices even lower than they would be if it was just the um, they're lower than if it was just the virus going around. So cartels, um, again, group of firms, then they have this agreement to do that. So one of the big things we'll see is that both of these are technically going to be illegal in the U.S. On the grounds of uncompetitive practices. So the idea of them being illegal, at least in the U.S., and OPEC is so OPEC isn't. It's interesting with them. They're considered an intergovernmental organization, but they are an international cartel. The hard part about them is you can't. All these countries are sovereign, so we as the United States can't just say, "Hey, you have to break up OPEC," because they're sovereign countries. They're free to do that if they choose. However, if within the country, so we had this gas station example, if we decided to cooperate or to collude with each other, um, it'd be considered uncompetitive just because you're taking advantage of the consumer. Um, and that's kind of not like, I think this is objectively speaking, it's not really a good environment for a market to flourish. So that's what we see in the US, collusions, cartels. They're fun stuff. But what we will see is Even though, yeah, so it sounds like we just, make a cartel and, rip people off. It's not going to be that easy. And I'm going to give a little precursor to what we get to go into tomorrow on Wednesday, and then I'll shut down for the day. So what we're largely gonna be looking at is this idea or this branch that's called game theory. And with this, we're looking at, and this is technically a branch of math, but it's heavily used in economics. And this was my favorite part of grad school. This is my favorite part of everything. So with game theory, what we look at is we want to look at how are players behaving. And so we talked about the strategy game, right? I make my decision based off what you're going to do. You make a decision based off what I do. What game theory is going to do is it's going to actually analyze these games and help you decide what decision a player makes based off of their payoffs and based on what other players decide to do. So just like it sounds like in game theory, we're dealing with games. What we're going to see is that a lot of the decisions that we see in the world are in essence games of some sort. We don't necessarily think of them as games, but they kind of act similar to a game of, say, tic-tac-toe or a game of chess, right? It's just a different playing field, maybe different things are at stake and so on. But we're going to see that a lot of things that come up are very similar to a game and it can be analyzed as such. Um, so on Wednesday, what I'll get into is we'll look at how to actually analyze these games. So how will I decide what move I want to pick as a player? Then how will we actually get into like an equilibrium of sort? Um, so how will we see that? And then we'll run into the situation called prisoner's dilemma, which again we'll get into as we go through. Then after that, we'll have a few applications. One of them is firms, like the firm example that we're talking about now. We'll also get into things like political campaigns. Um, I'll bring up the Cold War and uh, kind of put a little bit of a curveball on our attitudes of nuclear warheads and kind of a different perception of that. And then at the very end of that, we'll see that oftentimes it can be rather hard to actually enforce that cooperation. And we'll see some issues that come up with our model with the models that we use. One of the big issues we're going to see is that at this point, we're playing with a model where we look at today, and that's all we care about. And for the sake of our class, all we care about is today. But if what we'll look into is how we're not going to look into how to do it because it's kind of grad school type stuff, or a little bit of a higher course stuff for what we're looking into. But we'll look at what's um. So one of the things we're gonna see is it's always your best interest to stab your friend in the back. Uh, right. In essence, if you're in this choice, that'll always be your incentive. So where is that gonna fall short? And we'll see that it will, in essence, because I have to face tomorrow, whereas in our models, we're just saying I only have to face today. So if I decide to tell on you and get you sent to prison for 10 years, in 10 years, you're going to come out of prison. Then I have to deal with the situation again at that time. So we can't always run away from our problems, and we'll get into that on Wednesday.